Hello, everyone. We have a situation where the main speaker is unable to unmute himself. Today's talk is on living with languages, multilingualism as a resource. And the speaker is Professor Ajut Mohanty, whose lifelong crusade is to teach people in their own mother tongue, and besides that, knowing other languages. So the formal introductory remark will be given by Professor Padmini Barua, who is from University of Guwahati. She is the chair of Department of English Language Teaching. And the concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Girdhar Rao from Azim Premji University, where he is teaching at the School of Education. So welcome you all. Situation is a little precarious. We will see whether he will be able to join. He has joined, but unable to start. So let's start with Professor Barua with the introductory remarks.
Thank you. And good morning and good evening and greetings to all colleagues present here today to listen to Professor Ajut Mohanty share his thoughts on the topic, Living with Languages, Multilingualism as a Resource. Before I speak about Professor Mohanty, I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Raziuddin and all colleagues from Indian Diaspora Washington, D.C. Metro for organizing this event and for giving me the privilege of introducing Professor Mohanty and his work. I do have a disclaimer here. I cannot do justice to the depth and breadth of Professor Mohanty's scholarship and will only be sharing a few highlights of his work and life. As multilingual brain imaging has shown, multilingual brains display greater cognitive flexibility and functions than monolingual brains, but we have not yet been able to fully document the complexity and resourcefulness of multilingual minds. In India, where multilingualism is both an unconscious and unavoidable way of life, we have several forms of multilingualism. We have what I like to refer to as, for example, sequential multilingualism, which is the ability to use different languages one after another for different purposes. We have simultaneous multilingualism, which is our ability to use several languages with the same person in the same context and even in the same sentence. We also have dialectal multilingualism, which refers to our ability to use different varieties of the same language with different people or in different contexts. Now, in a career spanning almost 50 years, Professor Mohanty has been instrumental in drawing the attention of academia and policymakers to the complex ways in which multilinguals in India and Southeast Asia negotiate life, society, culture, and education. Professor Mohanty's work demonstrates the layered, intricate, and intimate nature of Indian and Southeast Asian multilingual contexts, which include linguistic phenomena that traditions of European, American, or other Western scholarly thought have not yet been able to capture or describe. Along with colleagues such as Tovi Skutnap Kangas, Robert Philipson, Suresh Kanagaraja, Ramakant Agnihotri, Minati Panda, and Ophelia Garcia, Professor Mohanty has played a key role in providing conceptual categories as well as robust research paradigms to investigate the practices, policies, and politics of thriving multilingual societies like India. Professor Mohanty is therefore one of India's most respected scholars on multilingualism and multilingual education, and a global leader in mother tongue-based multilingual education initiatives. A widely traveled academic, Professor Mohanty is an applied educational psychologist by training with a PhD in education psychology from the University of Alberta in Canada. Professor Mohanty has more than 40 years of service in key institutions such as Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, popularly known as JNU, and Utkal University, Odisha. He has been a Fulbright visiting professor at Columbia University, New York, and a Fulbright senior scholar at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Killam Scholar at the University of Alberta, and Senior Fellow at the Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysuru, and has delivered invited lectures in universities in countries such as the USA, Australia, South Africa, the UK, the Netherlands, Greece, Germany, Japan, China, Malaysia, Turkey, Switzerland, Mexico, Thailand, and Canada, among other countries. He is the founder director of two international projects. The first called From Mother Tongue to Other Tongue, and the second called the National Multilingual Education Resource Consortium at JNU. Professor Mohanty is also a writer, an essayist, and a columnist in Odia. In his 9 major books, his more than 200 other scholarly and popular publications, such as the much cited The Multilingual Reality Living with Languages, published in 2019, Multilingual Education for Social Justice, Globalizing the Local, 2009, and Multilingualism of the Unequals, 2004. Professor Mohanty has delved into areas such as linguistic inequality and marginalization, multilingualism and social justice, multilingualism as an economic equalizer, language hegemony and dominance, provoking us to reflect on and respect our own multilingual abilities while recognizing the cognitive, academic, economic, and cultural perils of linguistic colonization. His published works and public lectures have paved the way for a radical shift in conceptualizing the teaching of English, reflected in India's National Education Policy 2020, which advocates learning English as well as other language and content subjects through learners' home languages. In my own collaborative work with Professor Mohanty, we have investigated the language education policies of India, especially in relation to English and English medium instruction, and how policy implementation has resulted in what he has termed the double divide. While promoting translanguaging as a way of life as well as a pedagogical practice, Professor Mohanty has been an advocate of allowing children to begin education in, I quote, their language of thinking, unquote, a concept that resists the notion of a single linguistic repertoire as posited by scholars such as Ophelia Garcia and Angel Lin, 2017, and instead conceives of languages as markers of identity and distinctive cultures. A doting grandfather and family man, Professor Mohanty is based in Bhubaneswar, Odisha, and calls Odia language his love. In this talk today, we look forward to hearing Professor Mohanty deliberate on the deeper implications of being born in and functioning in multilingual societies, an area of study on which he has spent more than 440 years of research and writing. So we welcome Professor Mohanty, and I thank the organizers for organizing this event today. Over to you, Dr. Raziuddin. Thank you.
Okay, let's hope that Dr. Mohanty can unmute himself and can show. So, Dr. Mohanty, please.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry for the for the hiccup. You know, my laptop, I don't know, the microphone wouldn't switch on.
Can you
I'm
turn on?
so
Can you turn on
what
your
I'm
video?
I'm sort of using the iPhone now to communicate. Okay,
Okay.
let me quickly begin with my greetings to all of you, Rajesh Saab and Madam over there. I thank the Indian
Can you turn on video?
diaspora.
Can you turn on
Uh,
your video, sir?
I don't have a well. You don't. You are not able to see me.
No, we can't
Try on
see.
the phone.
I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening here. I'm using my. I don't
No,
know.
your video is off.
Why is video off? Okay. Um, Okay, what I'll do is I will log in again. If you just please allow me to do that. I will log in now. Oh, okay. I don't know why is the video not on. I don't understand this.
At the
Okay.
bottom left, there would be a icon for the video on the first screen.
Yeah, but I don't get that. Okay, I'm getting okay. Now, is it okay now?
Yes.
Dr.
Okay.
Razi, you can
Perfect.
unmute me now. I think
Yeah,
I'm showing a
yeah.
screen.
Okay.
Good,
Okay.
good.
I thank Padmini for a very generous introduction. Now, straight to the talk, living with languages, multilingualism as a resource. Basically, what I'm trying to do is bring a multilingual perspective to global societies in general and education in particular, which actually, as Padmini said, it has kept me engaged for over 47 years now. My research has been mostly on the tribal communities and children. I'm using the term tribal in an official sense, the way it is used in India, without, because it's customary to talk about indigenous people all over the world, but in India, tribal is the official term, and that's what I have been using. Now, considering the diverse nature of participation in this particular talk, um, I think I will keep myself to the non-technicalities, and I'm not even using a PowerPoint. Now, as I begin, I think I take some satisfaction from the fact that I think all of you here attending this meeting are not monolingual, definitely. Um, and because I think what is happening is the presence of multiple languages is an increasingly global phenomenon. And most countries in the world today are multilingual to varying degrees. And then subsequently, I will distinguish between what I mean by real multilingual society and the societies which are dominant monolingual with multiple languages, presence of multiple languages. As we know that the world has about 6,900 to 7,000 languages today. And sadly, many of these languages are critically endangered or dying. As we spend, let's say, an hour over this particular discussion, somewhere actually in some corner of the globe, the last speaker of a language is struggling for his last breath. So we know that every 2 to 3 weeks, one language is becoming extinct from the face of this earth. And that itself is a great loss, the loss of human language, because it involves loss of culture, loss of indigenous knowledge systems, biodiversity, and even the very future of human race. And therefore, it's important to be concerned about languages and their survival and growth and the linguistic human rights, about which I'm not really talking at length today. But today's topic is more on the nature and roots of linguistic diversity and multilingualism in our societies. As we know, United States has more than 350 languages. In India, Ganesh Devi's linguistic survey, People's Linguistic Survey, has identified at least 780 languages. Now, clearly, therefore, if you go by the number of languages present in these societies, both USA and India are highly linguistically diverse countries. But then we need to ask ourselves, what does it actually mean to grow up in these societies where you have multiple languages? Now in the US, English and in some cases perhaps Spanish is the language which is used in all public domains. Formal workplace, markets, public offices, and zones of trade and commerce and so on. The other languages, there are many other languages, including, let's say, something like Gujarati or Italian, German, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, kind of continuity and varieties, Bengali, indigenous languages like Navajo, Cherokee, Apache, and Hopi, and other languages. They are almost exclusively used in the home or in group domain, not in the common public domain of the society. So mostly in the home domain, and in many cases, the immigrant families also have the home domain shared between the indigenous language, the native language of the immigrants, as well as English. Now, these languages, the use of these languages do not actually overlap. That's the main point that I would like to make, distinguishing between the Indian multilingualism and presence of multiple languages in a society like United States. Now, in USA, for example, multiple languages do exist, but they remain parallel to each other. There is no meeting point. Something that has been called parallel monolingualism in a multilingual society, or a dominant habitus, monolingual habitus that characterizes the society. Now, in such societies, when a person is multilingual or bilingual, I think we have done some studies, myself and Tobes Kutnakangas, we did analyze the data on children growing up in immigrant families where they, besides English, they also have some familiarity with or some knowledge of the language of the immigrant family, the native language, as well as other languages of the community and so on. So what we find is that if a person is bilingual or multilingual in such a situation, she would use each of her language in different contexts. Therefore, it's more like as you go from one situation to the other, you change your language. So it's more like a multiglossic kind of a situation rather than being a multilingual situation, because languages do not meet in the same context more often than not. Now come to India. Now, what happens in India is that as one moves in different social contexts, one moves naturally and spontaneously between people and languages, not just people, but also languages. And when you do that, you are unconcerned about the boundaries between languages. You do not know, in fact, when does the boundary of one language end, the other begin. Say if you are moving from a dominant Bhojpuri speaking area and moving out into the Hindi belt, then you do not know where does Bhojpuri stop and Hindi begin, because the boundaries of languages are actually fluid. And so, and then when you are doing that, when you are crisscrossing languages, you do not bother. If you are a typical multilingual Indian user of language, you really do not bother whether you are crossing the boundaries between one language and the other. You also do not bother if your competence in the language is adequate. For example, I use Odia, I use Bengali, I use Hindi, English, Sanskrit in some cases, and some little bit of some tribal languages that I have encountered. Now, when I'm in a particular context, I would use X number of languages without ever wondering about my proficiency in each of these languages. It doesn't bother. So what matters is not knowing or not knowing the language. That doesn't matter. But what really matters is being able to communicate. Okay, so languages actually, as I said, they are overlapping. There are fluid boundaries between languages. And a common user of language uses the whatever knowledge of language that you have as tools. You confront a situation, you pull out of your toolbox one tool or the other, and therefore you, even if it may be inadequate, you pull different languages to communicate. So in the process, you mix languages, or you what is called code mixing and code switching in by the sociolinguists, and in the process you change from one language to the other. When the interlocutors change, you keep on changing languages and all that, because you are using them languages as tools to communicate. So what is more important is not the knowledge of language, it's not the competence in each of these languages that you are using, but it is the degree to which you are able to communicate in a given context. And even if that demands that you pull out from your language tools different languages and so on, incompetent or inadequately developed language. Yes, the same actually can be said in many other situations. But what is happening in India is that is the norm rather than exception. That's the kind of situation. Now, what happens? We have studied the tribal children and how do they grow up to deal with these multiple languages. What happens? Because the home environment of a child is basically more homogeneous. It's not always a language present there, or it is not always a very uniform single language situation. But I think the situation in the home is much more homogeneous compared to what is out there. So what we have studied, we have actually studied how children grow into linguistically more complex environments and how they add on to what I said, to their toolbox of communication. Now, a tribal child, as soon as the child is able to walk out of the boundaries of the home, of his or her home into the play area in the neighborhood or in the village. Usually, most of these tribal villages would have at least one or two families from the neighborhood who are not necessarily tribal, and therefore they speak a different language. And so, what will happen? The child would encounter other languages and gradually learn to play with a child who doesn't even speak her language. And then the child moves out further, goes, let's say, into the weekly market, which is extremely linguistically diverse kind of situation, and the child gradually adds on to her toolbox. The child encounters, let's say, television programs or radio programs where Hindi and English and other languages are used. The child adds on. The child is not necessarily developing competence in each of these languages, but I think there is a degree of comfort in being able to move between all these languages and maybe subsequently use a little bit of these in order to make the communicative act much more complex, much more complete. So we have described the situation as child's growing sphere of language or the language context, where the child is developing what I have called concentric layers of languages nested onto each other, beginning from a child's mother tongue or child's home language. The other languages, they grow out of the child's early language or early language proficiency, whatever the child has, and other languages are gradually developed around that in different concentric layers. So languages are getting nested onto each other in concentric layers of child's communicative repertoire. So what happens is, so there is a constant evolution of multiple or multilingual repertoire of the child. It's not a static process. The child goes on. For example, the marketplace, the weekly markets in the tribal areas are extremely linguistically diverse kind of situation. There are tribal communities, there are maybe neighborhood people who belong to different tribal community, different language groups. There are vendors who come from nearby areas. Some traders come from outside the state and so on. So there is a conglomeration of many languages which the child actually would confront when the child accompanies the parents to the weekly markets and so on. So the question that we asked some time back is, how does a child encounter all these languages and the nuances of using these languages, and how does the child actually become truly multilingual, where she has the facility of being able to deal with multiple languages, being able to deal with the societal norms that are part of being multilingual. For example, in a multilingual situation, there are certain contexts in which one language is more preferred compared to others, and other situations where a different language may be preferred. There is a particular kind of language used in home, but if the child is home and the milkman comes who speaks a different language, how does the child learn to negotiate the encounter with the person who speaks a different language and so on? So we conducted a series of studies in different parts of India. I'm not going to the details of those studies. Um, but I think these studies show that children are gradually socialized into the multilingual forms of communication and the multilingual social norm and they learn to negotiate the nuances of many languages and the norms for multilingual functioning, as I said. And broadly, without going into the details, broadly, what our studies show that somewhere between the age of 2 to 9, children develop progressively the comfort with functioning in a multilingual society. They develop the norms, implicit norms in use of different languages and so on. And between 2 to 9, they go through 3 broad stages. Again, I'm not describing the stages, but what I'm saying is first stage is a stage of linguistic differentiation. For example, if a child is observing or watching TV, even if the parents speak Bengali or Bengali is the home language, the child looks at a program which is English or Hindi and so on. Now, initially, the child knows, for example, barely 2-year-old child would know that, okay, this language is different. She may not be able to identify the language. She would, as she is changing or somebody is changing the TV channels, she would not even be able to identify or name the languages. But it begins with a basic process of being able to differentiate one language from the other. And that differentiation is helped by association of people with languages. As I said, the goala or the milkman coming in, or the household maid coming in and using a different language and all that. So gradually the child would learn to associate different people, different contexts, different channels, and different shops, for example, as she goes out with different languages, and that is how she learns to differentiate languages at the first stage. Again, the stages actually continue. There is nothing like one stage is over and the second one begins and so on. These are all overlapping stages. The second one is becoming socially aware of languages. That languages have a particular way of being used in a particular society. For example, child would learn that it's impolite to keep on using your language when you know that the other person doesn't understand it. So initially, the child would try to accommodate, although she doesn't have the competence, but she would try to accommodate and so on. So there is a beginning of social awareness of language, which is about 4 to 5 years of age. And then the child becomes gradually, by the about age 9, child becomes gradually more competent in functioning in a multilingual society. For example, I will just give you one example. All our studies have shown that a 9-year-old child, whether it's in Cuttack city in Odisha, or it is in Gorakhpur, or in Guwahati in Assam, or in the Agricultural University campus in Hisar, different parts where we conducted our studies, we found that all children, by the time they are about 9, regardless of the socioeconomic status, regardless of what kind of school they were attending and all that, all children are aware that English is a much more prestigious language compared to their own mother tongue or compared to other languages. So that's the awareness of language which makes you a more competent user in a multilingual kind of situation. Now, looking at the total pattern of our development, which I'm not describing in detail, what we have done is we have characterized the kind of multilingualism or the multilingual functioning that the child is developing, the language development of a child from a global perspective or total perspective. We have characterized it as multilingualism as a first language. That is, it's, we speak of child whose first language is English, we speak of child whose first language is X, Y, or Z. But here, looking in the multilingual situation, it's not just language 1 or language 2 or language 3, but the child is becoming or developing what we have, myself and Tove Skutnap Kangas, we initially analyzed the data, and we discussed about it and wrote a paper published in 2022. Unfortunately, Tove expired a couple of years back, and under very tragic situation. Therefore, perhaps my further conceptualization of MFL may remain somewhat inadequate. I'm still struggling with that concept. But what we had discussed and what we had identified is that multilingualism as a first language that the child develops, it involves, first of all, a competent engagement with societal multilingualism, as I have been giving examples of that, uh, to sort of to be able to uh, communicate, not knowing the languages as such. It's not developing competence in the specific languages the child is using, but being able to deal with the languages and engaging with different languages for developing what we have called multilingualism, to communicate more holistically and effectively. That's more important. And the second aspect of the multilingualism as a first language is that a child develops this multilingualism as the norm of communication rather than learning to use languages as separate systems. This is quite important, because what happens is, somewhere in the mind of the multilingual user, languages are all interrelated. I will come to that, and that is what makes multilingualism a more positive phenomenon from the individual cognitive point of view. I will come back to the latter. So, learning to use languages as separate system rather than, as a more common system rather than as separate systems. Learning to differentiate languages, speakers, and contexts. For example, you go to a workplace in India. No, sorry, a place of worship in India. Now, place of worship is a place where, I have studied place of worship in the tribal communities. I have studied place of worship in our regular communities or regular situations in the non-tribal areas. What happens is, the range of languages that you can possibly use in a workplace is different from the range of languages that you can possibly use in a place of work, for example, or in a marketplace. So what I'm saying is that multilingualism as a first language involves differentiating languages on the basis of speakers, on the basis of contexts, and so on. And so it's kind of more understanding the interrelationship between languages, their functions, and mutual complementarities. Like in certain situations, language X and Y may be complementarily used, whereas in another situation, the same complementarity may not hold good. For example, if I go to a temple, I would use maybe a little bit of Sanskrit, Odia, and whatever, but not English. So it will be quite inappropriate if I use English in a temple or in a place of worship and so on. Tribal communities, I have seen the same thing. I have watched the tribal rituals in their religious festivals, and also in their group gatherings, where they are settling, for example, marital dispute, and in the village and so on. Again, the same kind of thing, that the range of different languages, or how much you can crisscross across languages and which languages and so on, they vary from one context to the other. So, multilingualism as a first language would involve understanding the interrelationship between languages, their functions, and mutual complementarities across specific speakers, across different contexts, and so on. And then it also involves understanding the variation and diversity of language in social context. That in different contexts, different set of languages are used, and that becomes as a part of what should I say, as part of understanding that certain situations are much more diverse than the other. For example, a tribal child would know that marketplace is a much more diverse situation compared to her home environment, or her village communication is much less diverse compared to communication in a marketplace or in some other kind of a situation. So the last aspect, I think one of the last aspects of the multilingualism as a first language concept is the pragmatic knowledge of context appropriateness and in the choice of languages. Knowing that yes, use of one language is more appropriate when I go to let's say railway station or try to book my ticket, compared to when I go to the temple or to a religious place and so on. So, what happens as a result of such kind of development of what we characterize as multilingualism as a first language is that the child as well as the growing adult is able to negotiate complex multilingual social contexts, and that kind of constant negotiation of situations, of languages, of people, of contexts, and so on, enriches, because it's much more challenging. Challenging to deal or to find yourself in an environment where there are multiple languages being used. Some language may be more appropriate in one context, may be less appropriate in another context in the same situation, and so on. Therefore, it's much more challenging, and that challenge of dealing with nuances of switching between languages or observing different languages in different contexts itself, is something that is cognitively enriching, because it gives the children sensitivity to language, a heightened sensitivity. I have observed, for example, my grandson, I studied his early language development. When I was in JNU, he learned a little bit of Bengali, Hindi, Odia, and maybe a little bit of English and all that. When he moved to Mumbai and joined a preschool, I asked him, what are the languages that are used in his school? He said, well, it's English. You cannot use any other language than English in my class. However, children do use different languages. So he was able to name X number of languages, Marathi, Bengali, Odia, and other Hindi and other languages being used, Gujarati, and so on in his school. So a 4-year-old child developing that kind of a sensitivity in order to know, for example, see, he also knew that, okay, you can use your other languages only when you go out of the classroom, not inside the classroom and all that. And then he was able to tell me, and I was really surprised by this. He said, do you know that Odia and Marathi have certain words in common, Marathi or Gujarati, I don't remember. He said pakala, sakala, and that certain words which are common to these languages. And then he would sort of use an exaggerated notation or intonation as to how some children will, Bengali children will speak some about something compared to Odia child and so on. So that kind of complex awareness of language, which is present even in a 4-year-old child, and there are other studies which support this, shows that children do develop a lot of early sensitivity to linguistic and paralinguistic cues. And therefore, in broad terms, the ability to think about language as an object of thought, not just, we all use languages to be able to communicate. Language becomes a vehicle of our thought, and it moves my thought from one person, from me to somebody else. But that's the usual function of language. But what I'm saying here is that children do develop this heightened understanding, heightened ability to think about language as an object of thought. To know that this is this particular language, it has a particular vocabulary which can be compared to other languages and so on. So this is broadly called the metalinguistic ability, or the ability to think, stand back from the language and look at language and language forms and so on. For example, our studies with tribal children show that tribal children who grow up to be bilingual or multilingual, they have, for example, the better ability to listen to an ambiguous sentence and know that this sentence is potentially ambiguous. For example, I will give an example in English, not from the tribal or Odia languages in which we have used this. For example, they fed her dog biscuits. Now, this sentence, if you make this sentence an object of your thought, then it becomes transparent or becomes obvious that this sentence could mean they fed her dog biscuits or they fed her dog biscuits. So that's the kind of understanding that we are talking about when the child is dealing with a multilingual environment and so on, and getting socialized into multilingual modes of living. So the total, actually, what happens therefore, I think the total communicative repertoire of a child, or what we have characterized as multilingualism as a first language, um, it's actually developed through a series of social encounters, series of social interactions and so on, where languages are used and different forms of languages are used and so on. Therefore, for me, the process of multilingual socialization is a more collaborative process. It's not that a child is constituting some notion of or pragmatic understanding of languages and all that all by herself, but it's a co-constructed process. The adults and children together engage in a collaborative process of multilingual socialization, and uh, they develop this awareness. Now, what I have suggested, again, I am not going into the details of it. What I have suggested is the process of multilingual socialization through which the child understands, a child develops the multilingualism as a first language and develops understanding of the nuances of multiple languages moving from one language to the other. This actually can be seen as a prototype. If you use that kind of same kind of process in the classroom. So we are suggesting that the pedagogic process could use the natural multilingual socialization process, a collaborative multilingual socialization process as a prototype to further develop multilingual competence, multilingual awareness, among children. Because the multilingual repertoire of a child is actually a cognitive resource uh, because it enables children and adults subsequently to use language as a powerful tool or as a set of powerful tools for for cross-linguistic reflections and so on. Now, let me move on from there to what I call, more pedagogic kind of process. Now, what is happening? Why I am saying that this MFL, the multilingualism as a first language, and the prototype of collaborative process of multilingual socialization should form a prototype or form a model for classroom development of multilingual competence, because what has happened, and I think it's true everywhere in North American societies as well as here, languages in the classroom have so far been taught or used as a solitude. For example, I learned English in grade 6, and my teachers would struggle not to use any other language than English when they are teaching English. The same teacher may be an English teacher and maybe a teacher of geography, where she would use Odia and English maybe, but not in English class. So when in English class, the teacher would always use English. I remember sometime around grade 9 or so, we had a story in the book, English text, which is called Uncle Poser Hangs a Picture, where the protagonist tries to hang a picture on the wall and tries to be perfect, and he must have the picture completely labeled so that it will remain parallel to the ground and so on. He calls for a spirit label. That was what it was called. And we didn't understand what is a spirit level. The teacher struggled using his English to explain to us what is a spirit level, and got frustrated. But all he had to do, this was a male teacher, all he had to do is tell us in Odia what is the spirit level. But what he did, he left the class that day, and next day, he had a spirit level in his pocket. He brought the spirit level and say, "This is what it is." We all had seen masons and builders using spirit level to balance things out and all that. We would have known, but so that is the kind of situation where languages are completely treated as solitudes. Um, so what we need to understand that in order to get the maximum out of the multilinguality of a child, or the multilingualism as a first language, it is necessary to engage in multidirectional cross-linguistic reflection in the class. Therefore, what we are suggesting, and also I think it's not just our suggestion, but since 2007, a lot of people, Western research also show that when you are teaching English to second language learners, it is all perfectly all right. It is even much more effective if you use the learner's mother tongue, if you can use that. So what I'm saying is one of the implications of this kind of conceptualization of multilingualism and multilingual repertoire, or multilingualism as a first language, is is to understand that languages are truly interconnected, and therefore they cannot be treated as solitudes or isolated from each other. And it is important to somehow promote multidirectional cross-linguistic reflection in a class, so where the child can move between languages and so on, switching across different languages. And see, because what happens when you are using languages from a new, I'm not going into the neurolinguistic literature or neurolinguistic studies, but what is important is that when I'm, for example, when I'm talking to you in English, it's not that my mind or my brain and the neural mechanisms in the brain are all only triggered for English. In fact, there are ample evidence to show that when a person is truly multilingual, a child or an adult, all the languages are simultaneously active, even when a particular language is at the forefront. So even if a context is a particular language used, but all languages remain active, and therefore these languages actually strengthen each other. It's easy to move between languages. It's your process is not language specific. Languages are interdependent. There have been a lot of Western research. I will come to just a brief mention of the Western research. Let me see, what is the time now? Okay. 8:30. Oh, okay. I think I'll quickly wind up. What I'm saying is that when it comes to multiple languages and multilingual user, multiplicity of languages dealing with different languages in the same context, switching between languages, switching between interlocutors, and then having to switch languages and so on. These actually sharpen the cognitive and decision-making skills of a child, of a person, which has been called in the literature the executive functions, the ability to take a quick decision and decide about the right choices or decide about what is a false choice and so on. That is facilitated by or sharpened by the multilingual functioning. And then one has to remember, and again, I am not elaborating on this, one has to remember that mother tongue remains as an anchor to all these complex development of multilingual functioning and manifestation of multilingual repertoire. That is why the Western research, as well as our research here with tribal children, persuasively show that if the child's mother tongue is fostered early on, then it adds on to the subsequent multilingual competence. Except that there is a major difference which we have pointed out between the Western theory, which talk about taking the child's social communicative skills in the mother tongue to a higher plane, what is called the ability to cognitively think and engage in academic activities in the mother tongue, cognitive academic language proficiency. So you wait for the child to develop from the basic interpersonal communication skill, which is something that every child has by the time of going to school, and then the school helps further development of that skill into the cognitive academic domain, and then the child learns the second language, first language much more competently, and then that allows the child to learn the second language better. That is the broad kind of theory without going into the details of it, technicalities of it. But what we have noticed in the Indian situation, because children already have such a rich understanding of languages, such a rich repertoire of multilingual or metalinguistic ability and metalinguistic awareness, our children are ready to go into more cognitive use of language, more higher level of use of languages early on. And that is what, because languages are not completely isolated, unlike the Western situation. So in our context, what we are advocating, and in fact, for example, if you have a tribal child in Odisha, the child must know her first language, which is mother tongue, or tribal language, Odia, which is the state dominant language, and Hindi and English. I will not, one could talk about the language policy and three languages and so on, but I'm not going into that right now. But what I'm saying, that it is possible for our children to, by the school age, end of the school age, grade 12 and so on, it is possible, quite possible, for children to develop competence in 3 to 4 languages, and mother tongue can be actually considered a royal road to the development of multilingual competence in our children. Our own MLE Plus experiment, for example, shows that you cannot treat languages as separate. For example, when we had children struggling with tribal children, struggling with literacy development in Odia, which is the second language for them, and not their mother tongue, we quickly realized that unless, as long as you treat literacy development in a second language or as completely a classroom context and classroom exercise, you need do much better. So what we did, we use in our MLE Plus experiment, which ran for about 7 years in schools, primary schools in 2 tribal communities and tribal languages, Kui and Saura. We found that we called it a synergistic reading program, where the reading and the literacy development extended into the community. So we had the community children go into the village areas and meet. They would have storytelling. The older adults who were not necessarily literate themselves would be able to speak, tell folk tales and stories that they had to the children. Children will read the newspaper. Then there is a discussion about the village history, the context, and so on. We had a very rich kind of a situation, what we called synergistic reading program. We had storytelling festivals. We recorded stories that the adults who themselves couldn't read and write would be able to speak, and the stories were recorded, edited, and edited by the speaker themselves, and then this was printed with the name as well as photograph, because the name, sometimes the tribal adult is not able to read her own name, and therefore the photograph and the name on the author line, and then the story and so on, published bilingually. Then the My Village, My Story, the history of the village, the local history and all that, published bilingually. It had a tremendous impact on developing literacy in Odia and subsequently also in English and other languages. So what I'm saying is, it's important to understand that languages are not to be treated as isolated entities in a multilingual society. Now, I think I will just end by making a very flashing comment about English being the official language in India, in USA now. And what does it really imply? I do not know. I think all of you who are in the Indian diaspora would try to gauge what are the implications of English as being declared as a official language. But I think from my point of view, the immigrant families actually need to foster development of their indigenous language or the native language among the children, because that itself develops a sensitivity in the child to languages, encourage the cognitive development and cognitive metalinguistic development of children. Therefore, I would strongly feel that multilingualism is a cognitive resource and also affective and all that. I'm not going to do that. And I think to some extent it should be possible for the immigrant families in the US to promote some degree of multiple languaging and understanding or learning of their own native language by the children, which I think is not a deterrent to cognitive development. It really comes as a tremendous boost to better cognitive ability, creativity among children, and so on. I think I would stop here, and hopefully there will be questions coming from this, and then I think I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty. And let's hear Professor Rao, Professor Girdhar Rao from Azim Premji University for the concluding remarks, and then we will have the question and answer session.
Okay,
Dr.
thank
Rao.
you. Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. Very interesting, the whole range of issues that Ajit, Professor Mohanty has brought up, and in fact the initial comments by Padmini ji, the Professor Barua, on the internationality of these issues, on the internationality of Professor Mohanty's career. So there is actually a terrific continuity. But let me conclude with two anecdotes and one general comment. The first anecdote is of a family from Siberia in Russia, which is bilingual, Russian Esperanto. So the family visited us and they were staying with us, and the young 4-year-old Leo from that family spoke to me in Esperanto and suddenly switched to Russian and did not. My face went blank, and he did not. He was wondering what's happening to this man. He understood me just now, and suddenly he does not. So the language differentiation that Professor Mohanty spoke about, that was striking. That this child did not see, actually, 4-year-old did not see that he had shifted from one language to another, and the first language, Esperanto, I understood, but the other one, Russian, I did not. So the idea of multilingualism as a first language was very real for that child. It did not matter to the child that they were speaking, that he was speaking first in something and then something else. So that's the first anecdote. The second anecdote is of a 5-year-old or 6-year-old niece of mine who lived in Gurugram now, on the adjacent to Delhi, we were playing with Hindi numbers, 31, 32, 33, 34, the Hindi numbers rhyme. So 31, 32, 33, 32, 31, 32, 33. So she was quite pleased with the game. And then the next day she wanted me to play something else, and I said no. And she said, "अच्छा वो नकली number तो सुना दो. Why don't you give me those fake numbers again?" Fake numbers? Nakli number? Yes, she was quite certain. असली नंबर तो 1 2 3 होते हैं. The real numbers, the real numbers are 1 2 3. ये भी नहीं पता आपको? मतलब she was in fact completely at sea. Now this child at age 5 had already internalized a hierarchy of languages. Asli number 1 2 3 4, the real numbers, and nakli number, fake numbers, 1 2 3 4. So it was striking to me all those years ago that language attitudes, beliefs about language seem to be internalized so early and are so difficult to dislodge. So that's partly why I found Professor Mohanty's family remembrance or family account of what role Odia plays in their family encounter, although the children are in the US, right? So it struck me that it's really important to think about language beliefs as something that can be that need to be nurtured and cultivated early on. Now, zooming out, it strikes me that the 47 years that Professor Barua spoke about of Ajit's career, right? Thinking about language, thinking about languages and so on. Those 47 years of understanding of language and society are an important part, an essential part of thinking about the conversation between the university and the city. So the university has generated so much understanding of what is a good language pedagogy, language way, thinking about language. The city has not yet started listening to that. Is it a problem with the university? In any case, that conversation between the university and the city, I think about multilingualism, is absolutely an essential component if we are to think about how multilingualism in our lives will continue to be nurtured and cultivated. Thank you.
Oh, Girdhar Saab, yeah, I was expecting to that you will continue for a little bit. But anyway, thank you very much. And this is the announcement before we go to question and answer session. It's about next coming Saturday. Professor Amitav Kumar is a very, very well-established novelist of English language here in the USA. He comes from Bihar. He lives in Poughkeepsie, upstate New York. And his topic is many words for heat, many words for hate. So it's a very interesting topic. And probably he is going to touch upon one of the novel. He became very famous with the Immigrant Montana novel. And his columns appear quite regularly in New Yorker and many other very well-known magazines in English literature. He will be introduced by Basudhara Roy, who teaches at Karim College, Jharkhand, and the concluding remarks will be given by Professor Aisha Munira Rashid. Probably she is here in the audience. She is a senior professor of English at Aligarh Muslim University. So now we enter into question and answer session. Usual moderator for this session is right now in India. So I will try to be in his place. Anybody, all are open to ask questions. Let me see whether the toolbox is open, unmute themselves. You can share your start video. So I welcome you all to ask questions or make comments. Anyone? I don't see any raised hands. So maybe I'll ask Dr. Nazir, Dr. Nazir Ahmed, sir, to start with.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. A very fascinating subject. Many questions, sir, but I will focus on only one. That's the first part of your observation, namely that so many of the languages are becoming extinct. And reflecting on the forces that are responsible for the marginalization and extinction of some of these languages that are not spoken by a large number of people, it seems to me there are some inexorable global forces at work. One is globalization. The second one is urbanization. And the third one is the urge for political dominance. These seem to be inexorable, now becoming ubiquitous, unavoidable, marginalizing individuals and smaller societies, railroading smaller cultures. Just sort of a side comment, I'm an old timer and I look back at my own journey through different languages. I'm from the deep south in India. We spoke Dakni. Then in 44, when I entered school, I entered through Urdu medium schools. We had to learn Arabic for obvious reasons. Then the fifth grade, we were introduced to Kannada with a regional language and English. And then when independence came along, we had to learn Hindi. And then, of course, when we came to the United States for graduate school, we had to learn French and German and a little dabbling in. So, sir, what is your advice to policymakers in a polyglot society in India? And we faced these societies, these questions when I was in the Legislative Assembly in Karnataka in 78, and also as a member of the Knowledge Commission in Karnataka for 6 years. Namely, how and what language do we teach children so that at once they learn and are competitive in this global marketplace?
Unmute yourself, Ajit Saab. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Yeah. We can't hear you. Yeah. Ajit, Dr. Ajit, unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
I think he's trying to do that. Sir, we can't hear you.
He's pressing, but
We can't hear you, sir.
He's just talking.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I think I was not allowed to unmute myself. I know for some reason, I don't know. Anyway, I'm extremely thankful for your comments. I fully agree with you that yes, the globalizing forces are and the policies, state policies, are important in what is happening to minor and minoritized languages. Toves Kutnapkangas had written lots on this, linguistic diversity or linguistic genocide. That is what she was talking about. I know, I just give you one anecdote from my experience. When in 1978, I started work with tribal communities, the Kui community, the typical marketplace scenario was that early into the market, the man, the tribal person, tribal man would carry the whatever they had to sell, vegetables and maybe chicken or whatever sometimes, and their own produce, turmeric and other things. He would carry, and he comes to the marketplace and places the burden on the village weekly market, and then he would disappear. The trading is actually taken over by the woman. So she would do the bargaining. So if you have to go and bargain with her to buy some product, she always had the last word because she was using her language Kui at that time, 78. Now, further down the road, as I continue my visits to these areas and some studies, I find the Kui language as a language of the market has disappeared. And therefore, language now is either Odia or in some cases little bit of Hindi and Telugu also, because there are Telugu traders who come from the neighboring state and so on, but not Kui anymore. So the Kui woman has not only lost her language, she has lost her economy. So that's the kind of situation that is happening. The dominant forces I have talked about, I didn't have time to talk about the hierarchy and the double divide in hierarchical languages and in society, and what is happening to the minor and minoritized languages because of the state forces, because of the homogenizing impact of the globalization and so on. I think I couldn't agree more with the comments on what is happening to smaller languages in the world today.
Okay. So let me invite Sumit Sarkar. He has written a lot of comments during your talk.
Okay.
Sumit Sarkar, are you here?
Yes, sir. Good evening, all of you, sir. Thank
Okay.
you so much, sir, for diligently reading my comments.
Okay.
Actually, I am indebted to Ajit Mohanty, sir, who had sent me this invitation through the email. Because when I requested him to share a few of his books and articles, without much delay, sir had shared it. And thank you so much. As I am doing my PhD in English language teaching, this session was tremendously helpful for me because while giving pedagogical implications in my chapter 6, I have done my research on writing skills of Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya students who are studying in class 12. And my focus is on the writing proficiency of the students. I have taken error analysis of essay writing skills of the students. And while going through this, I came in contact with Ajit Mohanty sir's writings. Along with that, I had gone through Agnihotri sir's writings, and even so many webinars that have been conducted. I think one project is going on. It has been undertaken by teachers like Leena Mukhopadhyay madam from IFLU, and the name of that project is Multilingualism project. And it talks a lot about multilingualism and how it is the new norm that we have to set. As sir initiated that, earlier it was a norm that if a student studying in a private school would be fined if they use their mother tongue or L1. I think in some of the cases still it is going on. But based on the concept of multilinguality as the first language, I think there should be a transition in the ideological concept and how it is the transaction goes in the classroom, that we should allow our learners who are second language learners of English to use their mother tongue. And as I mentioned, that multilinguality is as a first language is for all the children of the employees whose father in a all India transferable job. For example, my father, he retired from CISF, that is Central Industrial Security Force, and I have visited almost like 20 places till now. Bengali is my mother tongue. I am a student of
Okay.
Kendriya Vidyalaya, so I know
Okay, can
English
you,
and Hindi.
yeah, please come to your
And
question.
Yeah,
yes,
please,
sir.
please
My
answer
question
first.
is now, so according to you, sir, what are the strategies that policy makers should include so that we can allow our learners to use their mother tongue in classroom interaction, specifically in English classroom, sir? Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity.
Okay. My response is first in respect of the English language teaching programs and the use of mother tongue. As I said, languages should not be treated as solitary entities, and mother tongue has its place. However, there is a catch. If you look at the translanguaging literature, what is happening, English medium classrooms being allowed to use other languages, what is happening is dominant mother tongues have a presence. But then the hierarchy of languages, the languages lower down the hierarchy, for example, a tribal language wouldn't have a place in the English medium instruction, even if a tribal child is present. In Bangladesh, there have been studies which show that yes, Bangla is used, but not other languages. In Nepal, Nepali is used, but not other minority or minoritized language. That is the first comment. The second one is the broader policy issues. Now, it's good thing that 2020 National Education Policy in India talks about multilingualism. But to reduce multilingualism only to a three language formula is actually misplaced. Because yeah, that is the reason the reference to Tamil Nadu and other places where there is a debate about two languages or three and so on. It's unnecessary. As long as we promote multilingualism, as long as the states realize that the children are benefited by learning number of languages, then that debate should cease. Unfortunately, the the NEP 2020, by prioritizing three languages, has misplaced the whole idea of multilingualism. Because if you talk about a multilingual society, then why limit multilingualism to three only? It can go beyond that.
All
So
right.
the whole debate is real somewhat misplaced. I think I could talk little more at that, but I will stop here
All right.
and maybe wait for the next question.
Yeah, so let me invite Ishrat Aziz Saab for some comment or a question. Be brief, Ishrat bhai. Ishrat bhai? Ishrat Aziz Saab, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
जी आपका सिर्फ आधा सर दिखाई दे रहा. Anyway, that's not important. Yeah, yeah, please. Yeah, you want to say something? Would you
Me?
like? Would you like to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
comment
I think
or a
he's
Wait a
question?
coming in.
second.
Be brief, please. Yeah.
No, I just listened to everything with great fascination. And I wanted to mention one thing. I also read that people who are bi or trilingual, their memory tends to last better because when they are speaking in one language, their mind is actively thinking of the other languages or
Yeah,
interacting
yeah,
with other languages.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
all I wanted to mention. I don't know what I read is true or it's just.
No, that's absolutely true. A lot of neurolinguistic evidence in support of that, and add to that also the robust finding that memory decline in the
Yes.
old age,
Mm,
particularly Alzheimer's disease, is
yes.
delayed in case of people who are already bilinguals or multilinguals.
Well,
Therefore,
maybe
there
I
is a
should I should
Yeah.
attribute my at the age of 85, my memory being not so bad, to the fact
Yeah.
that I know not
Eh,
only English and Urdu and Hindi, but also French, Arabic, and Portuguese. So when I'm
Yeah,
thinking of
yeah,
a word,
yeah.
my mind is constantly interacting. I mean, there is a kind of
Exactly,
interaction
exactly.
going on in my mind.
Exactly, exactly. I think we should all clap to that, actually, that you are trying to, even, if you try to learn a new language, I think Professor Giridhar Rao is here. If you learn Esperanto, in addition to the languages your memory will still be better, and I'm sure you will be able to do much better. But anyway, I'm
All
glad
right.
that you pointed that out.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
let me see whether Professor Metcalf, do you want to say something? Professor Metcalf? No. I mean, you are here, so I thought that maybe you would like to make some comment. Anybody who would like to say something, please. Dhanan, okay, one second. I see Mr. Dhananjay.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah,
Good
please.
evening, sirs, and all participants, and Mr. Mohanty,
Thank you.
Professor Mohanty. I just want to tell and ask a question about the multilingualistic situations in India. You said a very important thing, but the course curriculum which has been prepared by the experts, say professors or like teachers, etc. In that case, you will not find the tribal persons in this preparation phases. As a result of which, so many things are missing for the interest of the tribals and tribal language speaking persons. So, government should think of the people for those who has not properly attended yet till the passage of more than 75 years of independence. So government is lacking, and also NEP is still now not properly implemented for them also. So this is lacking
Yeah.
very much, and in sake of India, in case of India, for the tribals is also just become education a mockery. And you see, education is yet in India just lacking so many things, because after 75 of India, 75 of independence, it should be like Japan, how they are
Okay,
teaching their children and how we are teaching.
What is your
So my
question,
question
sir?
is why it is not being done? Why it
Yes,
is
sir.
not being done like developed countries?
Hello?
Yeah,
Ask
I
question.
got your question. I got your question. I think I developed the policy for Odisha, my state, in 2014 for mother tongue based multilingual education of all tribal children. Now, this is one of the recommendations of the policy, which was gazette notification was there, and it's just accepted policy. It's the only state which has a policy for mother tongue based education. Now, what we proposed there and what was being implemented until recently is that the tribal language, in languages, the textbooks were written by the indigenous knowledge holders from the tribal communities. It was not given to some other expert and sitting somewhere in the office, government office. The tribal people who are the indigenous knowledge holders, the artists, the artisan people, the farmers, all of them came together to develop stories, to illustrate the stories and so on for children's textbooks and so on. I think that's the kind of process. I'm not saying that is the only thing that can happen. There are various other ways of emphasizing the role of tribal communities in development of material for their language education and so on. But this is only one of the illustrations
Okay,
over that. Yeah, thank you.
let's move on to other questioner. Mr. Pradeep Belwal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for such an insightful talk. Sir, I come from a community from Uttarakhand, Gadwal, and there is another layer of complexity that has been added to this multilingualism. Sir, in the recent past, rapid migration has taken place from the hilly areas of Uttarakhand. The migration is so rapid that we have around 2,000 ghost villages. These villages are completely deserted, and they have moved to either to other states or to the plainer region of Uttarakhand. Now, I come from a community. This Gadwali is my mother tongue, and it's primarily a oral language. There is a little support from the governmental organization, and as the census of India rationalizes languages, it is rationalized as the dialect of Hindi, Gadwali language, despite it having a sizable population and different linguistic features. So, sir, how do we respond to such a situation where such large migration has happened and geography is no longer a protection for the language? The people are shifting to these dominant languages such as Hindi and English, and you see this shift happening where younger generation are losing their mother tongue, and it is not
Yeah,
even taught in schools as per as the three language model.
Okay.
yeah, I think English has been characterized as a killer language because wherever English has spread in the post-colonial world, the extent of diversity has reduced. It's very clear. It's not just, I'm not saying that English is the only killer language. English, Portuguese, French, and many other Spanish and so on are also killer languages in their own context. And in Indian context, Hindi is also a killer language. In the Tamil Nadu context, Tamil is also killer language. That is because there is a hierarchical pecking order of languages. The big languages, in Indonesia, they use the concept of naga to define this linguistic hierarchy. One big nago, devouring a smaller one, who in turn is devouring another smaller one. So that's the kind of thing. So what is happening in India is, yes, English is responsible for loss of many languages, smaller languages, but English is immediately impacting Hindi as well as other major languages, the so-called scheduled languages. And then these languages in turn are also responsible for loss of tribal minoritized languages. So that process goes on, and we need a drastic change in the state policies. We need a lot of other things, other policy interventions in order to stem that kind of a process.
All right. Thank you. So I will invite now um, Gauri Menon. She has, I think is she, written some comments. Gauri Menon, you would like to say something? Hello?
Hello, hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, sir. Mine was a very simple question, actually. I've been interacting with a couple of teachers, actually English teachers, for as part of my PhD work, and they have the constant fear. So I've been trying to work on trans languaging, and the constant fear that comes out of these teachers is if if I include L1, when will English language teaching actually happen? Where will the actual teaching of English take place? So this reluctance, I feel, is stemming from this constant fear. How do we address this fear, sir, in a
Yeah,
larger context?
there are two issues. One is the policymakers or the people who control how teaching is to be transacted in the classrooms. They have to have a broader understanding of the relationship between languages, and the teacher herself has also to know how to moderate the use of multiple languages in the classroom. What happens, unfortunately, is that the non-dominant languages or non-English languages are confined only to translation functions. So in some classrooms in Delhi that we studied, the teacher would read a sentence aloud from the textbook and quickly translate that into the local Hindi, and then emphasize the more functionally important words as she is translating and all that. So that itself is problematic. Using that non-dominant language only to translate and all that. So we need a rigorous training in how to multilanguage or how to engage in multilanguaging in a classroom, not just in teaching English, but for that matter, teaching any other language. I think we need some intervention at the policymakers level, some intervention at teaching methodology level.
Okay, thank you. So the last question I'll say is not the question, a brief comment, probably, Dr. Nazir Ahmed, again, and then we.
Yes, a very brief comment, if I may.
Yeah.
One of the tragedies of the loss of the languages is the loss of humor. How do you? I'm sure all of us have seen this. A story or a joke that you can tell in Kannada or Telugu or Hindi, you cannot say that in English. We as human beings have stopped laughing and smiling because we don't communicate in our native languages. So a contribution that the capable people can make is record the native humor and preserve it for humankind.
I fully agree with you. Unfortunately, in Odisha, there is a saying that the people, when they get angry, they speak English. So, so it's the other way around.
Or if you want to emphasize on something, then you switch to English.
Yeah.
That's a
So,
very common.
it's rather unfortunate. Actually, very unfortunate.
It becomes more forceful if it is said in English. So
Yeah.
so English dominates in our psyche.
Yeah.
So thank you all very much. It was very engaging, wonderful, session, and most of us are multilingual actually. I come from UP, so my mother tongue
I
is
know.
Urdu. So Urdu and then Hindi and English and some other little bit. But this is how most of Indians are. But one point that you were saying that the borders are fluid or the languages, but I'm sure that there is a problem. Like if a Bhojpuri interacts with a Tamil or a Karnataka or Malayalam, that will become a little bit really difficult to communicate.
Okay. Yeah, it depends on how they interact and all that. In the marketplace, in tribal areas, Telugu is used and children gradually learn to accept that as part of the environment and all that. Yeah.
So there is a window. Okay, with that hopeful window that we all can learn and become a better multilingual state or a nation.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And
Well,
so